Is your HOA always this fair gate creek? The president laughed at my mother's wheelchair ramp right in front of everyone, clipboard in hand, voice dripping with power. They called it an eyesore and mailed us a violation for breaking community harmony. The paper hit the porch like a verdict. Next morning, I set a recorder under the table. Gavel drop, porch light glare. One line would expose everything. Paragraph 12 to 07 inserted after adjournment. Anyway, the clubhouse is quiet now. The ramp's painted ADA blue, and the notice board finally says access granted. Under the humming lights of the Lakeside Estates clubhouse, the air carried that mix of burnt coffee and polished authority only HOA meetings could brew. Every chair was filled. On the front table, a clipboard reflected the white glare, and next to it sat the small ADA ramp permit form folded neatly like it didn't matter. My mother Martha sat beside me, her hands trembling just enough to make her cup rattle against the saucer. She tried to smile at the people who wouldn't look at her. Janet Cole, the HOA president, tapped her pen like a metronome. The chatter faded. "We've all seen the ramp on Lot 14, she said. "Maybe paint that thing pretty pink so it matches the walker." Laughter rolled across the room, short, polite, the kind that cuts deeper than an insult. My stomach nodded. I didn't move. The recorder I'd placed beneath the table clicked once recording. The projector behind Janet blinked alive, displaying the timestamp. Filed, 12/07. Received, 03/17. A procedural line. But that tiny text glowing above her head felt like a signature of fate. I could feel the hum of the fluorescent bulbs press against my temples. Every meeting sounded the same rules. Covenants votes that decided how neighbors were supposed to look. But tonight, every word landed harder. Janet shifted pages on her clipboard. "Variance request for ramp extension board recommends denial," she said briskly, as if announcing the weather. Someone from the second row whispered, "It's an eyesore." Another replied, "Devalues the property." My mother's breath trembled. "I only asked for a small extension," she said softly, "so I can reach the door without help." Janet smiled without warmth. "We all have preferences, Mrs. Hayes, but uniformity keeps our neighborhood attractive." She raised the gavel, an antique heavy oak, and brought it down. The sound cracked, but the metal cap slipped, knocking against the table and splintering the rhythm. The room froze. For 1 second, everyone looked at the broken gavel as if it had said something loud. I adjusted my tie, pretending to take notes. In truth, I was counting seconds on the recorder light. I had promised myself not to lose control, not here. Inside, the words built pressure. "I've sat through murder trials calmer than this." Janet cleared her throat. "Do I have a motion to deny?" Hands shot up before she finished the sentence. The board secretary scribbled. "Motion carries." The sound of pens scratching over paper filled the silence where decency should have been. My mother whispered, "Let's just go home, Michael." I met her eyes. Not yet. She blinked, scared more for me than herself. The room began to empty of compassion, leaving behind the sharpness of conformity. Janet stacked the papers, neatly proud of her order. "Mr. Hayes, the board's decision is final." I picked up the permit application, its corner still smudged with the thumbprint from when I'd submitted it weeks ago. The signature line read, "For safety, access only." I stood slowly, feeling every pair of eyes follow me. "Final decisions still have records," I said. Janet frowned. "Excuse me." I lifted the small black recorder, its red light blinking. "You've just filed your own case." Gasps spread like static through the room. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. Janet straightened her blazer. "This is a homeowners meeting, not a courtroom. Then you shouldn't have tried playing judge," I said quietly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The laughter that had filled the room earlier now felt like a ghost, still echoing, but no one dared repeat it. As I helped my mother's wheelchair toward the door, she whispered, "You shouldn't have said that." I smiled faintly. Someone had to. Through the window, I saw our metal ramp under the yellow security light, plain, sturdy, unapologetic. It didn't look like an eyesore. It looked like a promise. Behind us, voices started again. Muted arguments, fragments of shame. She recorded that, "No, he did. What Jean case?" The door clicked shut. Outside, night air replaced the stale tension. The recorder's screen glowed faintly before I stopped it. One line blinked in the corner. 17. REC saved. The HOA might think they'd ended something tonight. They hadn't. They'd started a record. The envelope slid through the brass slot and landed on the mat like a small verdict. Heavy paper, raised seal, the kind of stationery that tries to borrow the weight of law. I opened it at the kitchen counter while my mother watched from her chair. Violation notice. 01207. Failure to maintain community harmony. Harmony. They'd turned a ramp into a hymn sheet. Bad, she asked. Formal, I said, and pinned it to the fridge with a lighthouse magnet. It looked ridiculous, their law dressed up as decor. Eat something. After I read what they think we did. The diner on Miller Street smelled like bacon grease and hot coffee, Saturday late morning rush, the kind of crowd that knows everybody by first name and license plate. A radio hissed with sports talk who needed a new quarterback who didn't deserve the one they had, familiar voices arguing rules they'd actually read. We slid into a booth. The waitress brought 2 mugs before we spoke. At the counter, Frank Dillon, the HOA treasurer, stared into his coffee like it could balance a budget by reflection alone. He almost nodded at me. Almost. I scanned the notice. Section 1207. I read visual uniformity. Non-compliant modifications to the exterior viewable plane shall be remediated. I let the words sit there neat as a haircut. They found a way to call a ramp an opinion. From a back booth, someone said, not quietly, pink would have matched the walker. A pocket of laughter popped like oil. I kept my eyes on the text. Understand the clause. Don't take the bait. The radio host barked, "Third down and inches, discipline wins games." I took a long drink I didn't need. Frank slid closer, uneasy. "Morning, Michael, Mrs. Hayes. I got a notice," I said. "So did we," my mother added, steadying her cup. Harmony, failure. Frank's discomfort spread like a slow spill. "Look, 1207. The board." "Did the board write it?" I asked, "or did Janet?" "It's adopted language." "From where?" He glanced toward the radio for help. It couldn't give. "Old architectural guidelines. We've used it before." "On wheelchairs?" I asked. He studied the laminate. "I should go." "Sit," I said softer than I felt. He didn't. We were home by 2 when a compressor whined outside, the sound of jobs done to other people. I stepped onto the porch. 2 contractors wearing a lawn service logo had taped plastic over the ramp. One uncoiled a sprayer hose, the other pried open a 5-gallon bucket marked with a gray square. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Neutral surface paint," the older one said. "Work order from the HOA. Visual uniformity. This ramp is mine," I said. The younger man lifted his clipboard. "We were told it's an eyesore." The word hung in the air, ugly and weightless. "If you paint 1 inch," I told them, voice even, "you'll be repainting all of it back on your own time under a different notice, one with a case number." They didn't know what to do with that. The hose clicked off. The compressor wound down. They left without argument, which felt worse, like someone had merely pressed pause on an order. I scraped a fingernail along the metal. Gray dust came off anyway. A test patch done in the night, thin as contempt. By evening, the neighborhood thread had colonized every conversation in town. At the grocery, in the post office line, on church steps. Phrases floated by like leaves in the same stream. I went back to the diner because I wanted the radio more than dinner. A neighbor in a camouflage cap parked 2 stools down and performed his monologue at the room. "Maybe paint that thing pretty pink so it matches the walker." Janet's exact words. He waited for the laugh that didn't arrive. 2 men kept watching the game. The waitress refilled coffee and let the silence do the scolding. I turned just enough to see him. "That joke's on a recording," I said. He flushed, then grinned like he'd meant nothing by it. "Just keeping it light." "Light," I repeated. "Harmony's heavier than you think." He found something fascinating in his napkin dispenser. At home, I slid the violation notice into a new folder under the Lighthouse magnet scan, saved, copy printed. On the tab, I wrote HOA Harmony. Naming things trims fog off a fight. The porch light clicked on with the dusk timer. The gray smear on the ramp caught at a dull bruise I couldn't rub out. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. Just a single sentence that sharpened the whole day to a point. "Know your place, Judge." I turned to the screen so my mother wouldn't see, and felt that familiar click under the sternum, anger finding the right drawer. "Place," I said to the empty kitchen. "On the record." I tightened the ramp bolts 1 quiet turn at a time, the socket wrench clicking like a clock that only I could hear. The porch boards held the day's leftover heat. The air smelled like rain coming from somewhere beyond the lake. Crickets sawed at the edges of the yard. I wasn't fixing anything that was broken. I was reminding the wood and metal they were wanted. "You torqued the back brackets yet?" a woman asked from the steps. I looked up. Eleanor Park stood where the porch met the path, hands in a light jacket, hair pinned back like it had been arranged for court. Her voice had that evenness people get from telling hard truths more than once. "I was getting to them," I said, sliding the wrench over. "Evening. Evening," she answered, and stepped onto the porch like she'd been here before. Her eyes went to the ramp, then to the lighthouse magnet on the fridge inside, then back to me. "I sued an HOA over a ramp 10 years ago." I paused mid-turn. "You won." I did. She rested a hand on the rail. Not with outrage, with procedure. The rain smell deepened a promise, leaning closer. I tightened the last bolt and set the wrench on the tool bench, the good one with the oiled drawers that never stuck. "Procedure's all I'm asking for," I said. "They've given me paperwork in the shape of a shrug." Eleanor smiled, not unkindly. "Paper shrugs can be useful. They have dates, typos, signatures, and they forget what they told you yesterday." She tapped the rail gently. "You know ADA SEER 12132. "I know it," I said. "I didn't say how well. Then you know the language, no qualified individual with a disability shall by reason of such disability be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of services." She let the sentence hang where the porch light would have been if I'd turned it on. It applies directly or by analogy when quasi-public bodies enforce rules that deny access. The Fair Housing Act is your second spine reasonable accommodation case law that hates euphemisms. "Visual uniformity," I said. She nodded. Pretty words for a locked door. The crickets kept their rhythm, and somewhere a screen door thumped. My mother was reading inside. I could see her silhouette in the living room, a lamp haloing the frame. The ramp looked almost silver at this hour, the metal learning dusk. Eleanor leaned against the post. "Document everything. Minutes, notices, emails, times of day, who breathed when Janet spoke. Every minute becomes a bead on a chain. When it's long enough, it pulls on its own." "I've been recording," I said. "Good. Log the log. When you wrote, when you saved, where you backed up. Timestamp, screenshots. Screenshots of screenshots." She smiled at the look on my face. "They get cute. Be cuter." I opened the middle drawer of the bench and took out a yellow legal pad. "I'll keep a running index." She watched me write the first line, date, what, time, event, actor, evidence, and said, "The law doesn't shout, it waits." I looked up. She had said it simply like a weather report. It landed like a promise. "If we push, they will call it aggression," she added. "If we wait and show, they will call it inevitable." I thought of the men with the sprayer of Frank Dillon's eyes sliding off mine at the diner, of the neighbor in the camouflage cap repeating someone else's meanness like a song he didn't write. I shook my head. "Janet built Pier 112-07 for this." "She built it fast," Eleanor said. "Fast work leaves fingerprints." She tilted her chin toward the house. "Where do they store meeting minutes publicly on the HOA site? But the older ones disappeared." Disappeared is a word that keeps lawyers fed. She set a small flash drive on the bench. "Crawled what I could from the cached pages. And a neighbor keeps everything, printed them the night they went up. You'll want to compare versions." I took the drive, feeling its lightness. "Thank you. You'll thank me when you find what I think you will." She looked at the dark line of the street. Janet edits with a heavy hand. "People who enjoy order tend to leave their names in it." We moved inside to the kitchen table. The porch door creaked a sound that used to annoy me and suddenly felt like character testimony. I opened my laptop, plugged in the drive, and waited for the files to appear. The fan spun to life. On the fridge, the violation notice HR12-E07 watched like a square gray eye. Eleanor stood behind me, reading silently as I scrolled. Minutes from 6 months ago. 4 months. Last month. The same meeting title twice. 2 dates, 3 days apart. I opened the older one. A tidy paragraph on landscaping, a vote on pool hours. Nothing about uniformity. I opened the later version. New paragraph tucked neat between the old lines like a brick slipped into a wall while the mortar was wet. Visual uniformity standards governing exterior viewable planes shall be enforced at the discretion of the board president. My finger stopped on board president. A little dot at the end, placed like a nail. "Look at the author metadata," Eleanor said. I checked the file info. The editing username was a single word, J. Cole, and the timestamp lived exactly 1 hour after the meeting adjourned. No witness lines, no second signatures. There it is, she said softly, inserted after the fact. I printed both versions, watched them slide warm into the tray. The printer's tiny whir sounded louder than the crickets. My mother looked over from the living room, and I gave her a small nod I'd used from the bench when a piece of evidence finally stood up on its own. Eleanor tapped the later page right where that sentence sat. They'll say it's a drafting correction. They'll say it reflects the board's intent. They'll say you're combative. So don't be. Just hold the papers up next to each other. Outside, the first drops of rain ticked the porch roof. I stared at the line visual uniformity and read it again the way you read a slur you intend to answer in a language it understands. She did it alone, I said. Eleanor's coat rustled as she turned to leave. Alone is the easiest thing to prove. The door sighed shut behind her. I laid the two printouts side by side, breathed in the smell of wet dust, lifting and circled the sentence in pencil so soft the mark barely showed. The ramp sat silver in the first sheet of rain. Somewhere in the neighborhood a porch light clicked on, and for a second all I could hear was the patient sound of waiting. By sunset, the bulletin board outside the clubhouse wore a new notice pinned dead center emergency session tonight. Someone had underlined attendance strongly encouraged with a heavy green marker that bled through the paper. Inside, the air was thick with perfume sweat and the low buzz of the old projector warming up. I could feel it in my teeth, a hum that sounded like electricity remembering a promise. Every seat was full. People stood along the walls fanning themselves with leftover barbecue flyers. I slipped into a chair near the aisle. The flash drive in my pocket felt heavier than it should. On its label, written in block letters, Meeting 0317 at MP4. At the front table, Janet Cole stacked her clipboard, the gavel placed just so a cup of water sweating onto its napkin. She smiled like a headline tight and meant to control the story. "Thank you all for coming," she said into the microphone. "This emergency session concerns a disruption to our community harmony. An ungrateful resident has chosen to disregard standards that protect everyone's property value." A few nods. A murmur of agreement. Eleanor Park sat in the third row, hands folded, expression calm, as a witness who already knew the verdict. Frank Dillon hovered near the coffee urn, eyes fixed on the floor. Janet clicked a remote, and the projector filled the wall with a pale blue slide, Visual Uniformity Standards, 412-07. "This clause exists to maintain consistency," she said. "We all sacrifice a little for the greater good." The flash drive burned against my palm. I raised my hand. "Madam President, I have a clip the community might want to see." Janet blinked. "We've prepared materials already. This won't take long." The hum of the projector deepened as I walked to the cart. My reflection ghosted across the blank screen. I plugged the flash drive in. The screen flickered once, then settled on the familiar image. The last meeting, the same fluorescent light, the same table, the same woman laughing. A single frame of silence held the room. Then her voice filled the air. "We've all seen the ramp on Lot 14. Maybe paint that thing pretty pink so it matches the walker." The recorded laughter, sharp, nervous, complicit, echoed through the speakers. A few faces paled as they recognized their own voices. Janet stood. "This is taken out of context," she said quickly. "We were discussing aesthetics." I pressed pause. The projector froze, her mid-sentence, mouth open, hand raised. Eleanor's voice cut softly through the stillness. "Context is the sound. Before laughter, Janet." The crowd's mood shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered, "She really said that." Janet's knuckles whitened around the clipboard. "This is manipulation," she snapped. "An edited recording." Frank took a cautious step forward. "I remember that night," he said. "I didn't think it would sound like that." Janet shot him a look sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. I switched slides. The screen now showed the violation notice, Fiber 12-07, its gray header enlarged until the words, "Failure to maintain community harmony," filled the room. Gasps moved like a current through the audience. Janet tried to keep her voice steady. "The board acts within its authority." Eleanor rose halfway. "Then, let's see the minutes authorizing that clause." The crowd murmured hungry now. I brought up the next image, two versions of the meeting minutes. The left one, clean. The right one carried an extra paragraph wedged neatly between landscaping and pool hours. Author Jacole. Timestamp 1 hour after adjournment. Silence deepened thick collective understanding. "That's a drafting correction," Janet said, voice cracking slightly. Without signatures? Eleanor asked. Janet's jaw tightened. The intent was already agreed upon. Frank rubbed the back of his neck. It wasn't voted. A single cough punctured the quiet. The projector hummed louder heat rising from its fan. I advanced one last slide, the text cue glowing in blue at the corner of the frame. Filed 4/12/07. Received 03/17. No one moved. I looked around the room, the neighbors who'd laughed, the ones who hadn't, the ones pretending now they hadn't heard a thing. "I'm not here to argue," I said quietly. "I'm here to remind everyone what's already on the record." The microphone picked up every word like the slow turn of a key. Janet's voice came small. We'll take this under review." "You already have," I said and unplugged the flash drive. The screen went blank, leaving the ghost of her frozen image burned into the projector's afterglow. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The hum kept going steady as a heartbeat that refused to stop first. Then from outside, a camera flash broke through the window, white sudden absolute. Someone from the local paper, maybe. Or just the universe deciding to take its own photo of this moment. Every head turned toward the light. Janet flinched. Frank exhaled. Eleanor smiled once the way people do when patience finally gets a pulse. And I sat back, the air buzzing, thinking how justice doesn't always start in court. Sometimes it starts in a crowded clubhouse with bad coffee, a file name, and a room full of neighbors forced to watch themselves. Night rain tapped the office window like a patient knuckle. The printer across from my desk answered with its own small heartbeat, green light on amber light blinking the promise of paper made permanent. I'd turned every other lamp in the house off so the room would feel like what it was, a place for facts. Binders climbed the bookshelf in courtroom colors, black, navy, red. Tabs labeled with the judge's handwriting. I'd learned to make smaller at home: HOA harmony, ADA ramp minutes, V1, V2 billing, Q1, Q4. On the desk sat a thick manila envelope stamped in red subpoena prep. The ink had bled into the fibers the way rain bleeds into the first inch of soil. Frank Dillon stood just inside the doorway, hands buried in his pockets like he might lose them otherwise. He looked too large for the room. His tie hung loose. His eyes were the gray of paper that's been folded too many times. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I said I would," he answered, voice flat. "Doesn't mean I know how to be helpful." "You'll be useful by being honest," I said, and slid the chair out for him. "Sit." He did slowly. The rain thickened and then took a breath, letting us hear ourselves move. I opened a fresh legal pad and wrote the header. I always wrote date, time, event, actor, evidence. Then I set a small digital recorder on top of the line and pressed record. It beeped once. We both watched the red dot steady itself. "Start with the fund," I said. "The ADA improvement line item. We allocate in April," he said. "Quarterly review in July." I pulled a stack of scans into the cone of light. Allocation, disbursement, vendor verification. Standard. Then this. I tapped 4 entries, each one under $2,000, each one labeled consulting. 4 payments to GS Accessibility Consulting, $12,000 in total. Frank swallowed. "I saw those. I thought they were for design work." "You saw the postings," I said. "Did you see the contracts?" He shook his head. "Janet said the invoices were handled directly. Small vendor. Faster that way." I clicked the trackpad. The screen showed a business registration page, a public database with all the romance of concrete. GS Accessibility Consulting, I read aloud. Registered 8 months ago. Owner of Record Gavin Steele. Frank frowned. "Who is Janet's nephew?" I said. The word nephew landed like a drawer sliding shut. He deflated into the chair. "I didn't know that." "You should have," I said less sharply than he deserved. "That's why treasurers have spines." He tightened his lips. "She brought me the checks already filled. Said the board had discretion on routine expenses. Said I was slowing things down." "She brought you the checks," I repeated. "Already filled." He nodded. "I signed them. A beat. Mostly." "Mostly." The printer clicked awake, then thought better of it and went still again. Frank stared at his hands. 3 were mine. One wasn't. I waited. He kept his eyes down. She gave me a stack of things to sign after a meeting. People were leaving. I was tired. She said, "Just sign the treasurer line, Frank. You've seen the invoices." He rubbed the back of his neck. I hadn't. But the date was already there. The payee, the amount. I signed. He swallowed again. When I looked later, the one from 2 weeks before, I don't. It looks like my signature. It isn't. The rain found a new rhythm. I let it play out. The recorder caught the quiet we needed. Under pressure, I asked. He nodded. She said I was being difficult, that my lawn was out of compliance, that violations can add up. She smiled when she said it. I signed. I printed the vendor list and slid it toward him. Say it clean, Frank. He took a breath he could be proud of someday. One signature on an ADA fund disbursement was forged. The others were signed by me under pressure from the board president. I wrote the sentence as he said it the way a court reporter would. He watched my pen like it was erasing him and then realized it wasn't. I pulled out the manila envelope and opened the flap enough for him to see the cover sheet, Sopoena, Prep Vendor. Records Banking Email Board. President and Treasurer. Meeting Minutes. Native Files. He winced. Do we have to go that far? We have to go exactly that far, I said. No more, no less. I clicked another window. On the screen, the 4 disbursement dates lined up beside 4 board emails with subject lines as blank as arithmetic maintenance, uniformity consulting follow-up. The replies were short and careful. The attachments were missing. Drafting corrections, he said, bottom lip tight. Intent reflected. That's what she said about the minutes. She said the same about money. I turned the monitor so he could see. I'd overlaid the payment dates with the days the visual uniformity paragraph appeared in the minutes. The second disbursement landed an hour after the edit. The third, the next morning's first email. This, I said, tapping the screen, is why procedure exists. He stared until his pupils adjusted to a different kind of dark. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, he said. You still can, I said, but it won't be by keeping quiet. We listened to the printer breathe a little and stop again. A silent beat stretched long enough for both of us to visit the version of ourselves we'd wanted to be here and then come back to the men we were. Frank's shoulders squared bit by bit as if his bones had made a choice. What do you need from me, truth under oath? Access to the account reconciliations, vendor contact, and a written statement about the signature. He nodded once. I'll bring the check images tomorrow. They show pen pressure. My real signature dips on the D. The forged one doesn't. That matters, I said. When this goes public, he added, it's going to get ugly. It already is, I said. We're just turning the lights on. The printer finally spun up for real. The tray rattled, the rollers caught. A page slid into view. Then another, then the last, each one landing with a sound I've come to trust more than any speech. Frank stood. Michael. Yes, I'm sorry, he said. For what I signed. For what I didn't stop. I let the apology sit where it belonged, between us, not over us. Bring me the reconciliations, I said. We'll let the record do the talking. The printer spat the final sheet into the tray. In bold, at the top under the seal, U.S. District Court pre-hearing notice. The rain knocked once like a judge on a chamber door, and the room remembered how to breathe. Finally, someone fought back. The post office door chimed twice as I stepped in rainwater running from my coat. The clerk behind the counter looked up, then down at the thick envelope I placed on the scale. Its corner bore the red stamp I'd added at Dawn Evidence Certified Mail. He weighed at the machine, ticking like a slow clock. Anything fragile, only the truth, I said. He laughed once, thinking it was a joke. The printer spat out a sticker. He pressed it flat and handed me the receipt. Tracking included. When I turned to leave, the bell above the door echoed sharp against the linoleum. Outside, drizzle turned the sidewalk silver. I slipped the receipt into my wallet beside my bar ID, then adjusted the briefcase at my knee. Its latch had loosened again, and through the gap I saw the edge of a judicial seal, faint gold against dark leather. I snapped it shut. Some secrets need to hold a little longer. The federal courthouse rose through the fog like a verdict no one wanted to read. The air inside was cooler, heavier, scented with paper and disinfectant. Security waved me through with the ease of habit. They didn't know. They only saw another man in a raincoat holding a file he refused to drop. Down the hall, portraits of judges lined the walls, every frame a reminder that justice had a face, and sometimes it looked tired. From a side room came the hollow sound of a gavel being tested by a clerk, tap, 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 the percussion of authority rehearsed for later. At the end of the corridor, Janet Cole waited outside the mediation suite. Her lawyer, a man with hair that never lost an argument, stood beside her. Janet's purse strap was wound twice around her hand, fingers white at the knuckles. When she saw me, her chin lifted. "You didn't have to bring this downtown," she said. "You could have come to the board privately." I stopped 3 feet away. "That's how we got here. Too many private decisions." Her lawyer frowned. "Mr. Hayes, this process should stay civil." "It will," I said. "That's the point." The brass plaque on the door read Mediation Room B. Below it, smaller letters spelled M. Raines, Mediator. I knew the name. Years ago, he'd clerked for me, sharp mind, steady tone. Now he worked for the Administrative Dispute Office. Fate liked its symmetry neat. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with the same pitch as the gavel outside. Raines rose from his chair. His hair had gone gray, but his eyes still carried that courthouse calm. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Purpose today is settlement. Facts only, no theatrics. Everything recorded." He pressed a button on the desk recorder. A small red light glowed alive. My counsel opened the binder. Exhibit A, video from March 17th, HOA meeting, authenticated metadata. Exhibit B, dual versions of Board Minutes 1 showing post-adjournment insertion of Outartar 1207. Exhibit C, ADA, fund disbursements totaling $12,000 to GS Accessibility Consulting, owned by respondent's nephew. Exhibit D, treasurer's statement, admitting forged signature under pressure. Janet's attorney shifted. "These are administrative errors, not malice. The ramp decision followed community standards." Raines looked up. "Standards don't excuse fabrication, counselor." I kept my hands folded. The briefcase leaned against the table leg, the weight of its contents steady as heartbeat. The video played. The sound filled the sterile room, Janet's voice, crisp, confident, cutting. "We've all seen the ramp on Lot 14. Maybe paint that thing pretty pink so it matches the walker." Then came the laughter, the same chorus that had filled the clubhouse weeks ago. No one spoke now. Even Janet didn't look at the screen. Her face reflected in it a ghost of her own authority. Raines paused the video. "This was your voice, Mrs. Cole." "Yes," she said quietly, "but no edits." "No," she admitted. "Proceed," he told my attorney. The next slide displayed the violation notice, 1207, the phrase, "failure to maintain community harmony," underlined. Then the spreadsheet of fund payments appeared, names and dates lining up like dominoes. Raines tapped his pen against the table. "Payments and bylaw amendment within 24 hours of each other. Correlation isn't always coincidence." Janet's lawyer straightened. She acted under discretion. "This hearing feels personal." Raines set the pen down. "Personal or not, the evidence speaks." "What's your position, Mr. Hayes?" I looked across the table at Janet. "My position is simple. Accessibility isn't negotiable. Neither is honesty." Janet's jaw tightened. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," I said. "You did that when you mocked my mother and forged your own law to justify it." The silence that followed was clinical, no outrage, just the absence of denial. Rain pressed against the narrow window, softer now, like applause from far away. Raines cleared his throat. "Here's what I propose. The board rescinds Outartar 1207, as applied to accessibility, restores the variance, and agrees to an independent audit of the ADA Improvement Fund. Both sides sign non-disclosure until compliance verified." Janet's attorney leaned toward her, whispering. She shook her head. "No admission of guilt," she said aloud. "You don't need to confess," I said. "The record already did." Raines leaned back, studying me, then turned his gaze to Janet. "Mrs. Cole, I recommend cooperation. Otherwise, this moves to trial." Her lips trembled just enough to reveal how close her composure sat to collapse. "Trial in front of who?" "Federal jurisdiction," Raines said. "ADA violations, misuse of funds." She stared at me, eyes narrowing, calculation returning. "You've done this before," she said. "The way you phrase things, the confidence. Who are you?" Raines shifted slightly. "Let's take a short recess," he said. Then, almost reflexively out of habit from another life, he added, "We'll resume at the top of the hour, Your Honor." The words hung in the air, sharp as a gavel strike. Janet's head snapped toward him, then to me. "Your Honor," she repeated, voice cracking. Her lawyer's face drained color. I reached down, lifting the briefcase. The latch gave way and the judicial seal caught the light, clean, undeniable. Janet's breath hitched. "You're the judge," she whispered. "You I met her eyes evenly. "Justice doesn't need volume," I said. "Just venue." Rains exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. The recorder's red light kept blinking each pulse a heartbeat on the record. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the courthouse roof. It wasn't loud, just steady, the kind of sound that means change has already begun. The town hall was overflowing before the gavel ever hit the table. Folding chairs lined the walls, people stood in the back, and cameras from 2 local stations were already aimed toward the front. The hum of voices carried the scent of tension like ozone before lightning. Every word sounded half-whispered, half-ready for history. I sat at the center of the long board table, the gavel resting under my hand. The placard in front of me no longer read Resident Complaint Hearing. It read simply, HOA, Special Session, Accessibility Review. The microphone hissed and popped as I adjusted it, feedback cutting through the room like a warning. In the back row, Eleanor Park met my eyes and gave a slow, measured nod. It was the same gesture she'd given weeks ago on the porch, the one that said, "Stay steady." Beside her sat my mother, her hands folded in her lap, the small gray ramp visible through the window behind her. On my left, Frank Dillon sorted through documents with careful fingers, the rhythm of a man at peace with his conscience. Across from me, Janet Cole sat rigid, her blouse pressed sharp at the collar, lips pale but defiant. She glanced once at the cameras and then at the residents, the same neighbors who had once laughed at her jokes. "Good evening," I began. The microphone caught my breath before my words. "This session convenes under Article 3 of the Lakeside Estates Charter. Purpose to address governance violations related to accessibility, financial integrity, and code amendments." Murmurs rippled through the room. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, "He's quoting federal law." Janet leaned toward her attorney, whispering fast. The man shook his head subtly, too late for damage control. I lifted a folder, its tab labeled ADA and HOA Governance. Let the record reflect that the Americans with Disabilities Act Section 132 prohibits exclusion from public programs on the basis of disability. The Fair Housing Act extends that to community associations. I paused, letting the legal weight settle. Our HOA is not above that law. A few residents nodded, others looked at their shoes. The cameras panned left, capturing the faces of those realizing what compliance actually meant. Janet folded her arms. "We've already discussed this privately," I cut in, calm but firm. "You discussed it privately. You enforced it publicly." The gavel's first strike silenced even the hum of the lights. Frank stood clearing his throat. "As treasurer, I confirm the ADA fund discrepancies. Payments were made to a relative of the board president without approval." His voice didn't tremble. "I take responsibility for my part, but the system was pressured and misused." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Janet turned toward him, disbelief rising in her eyes. "Frank, you're mistaken." He met her gaze evenly. "Not anymore." Eleanor spoke next, her voice steady but filled with quiet pride. "I reviewed the federal filings Mr. Hayes submitted. Everything's in order. The variance denial violated both state and federal law." She paused. "And decency." Applause broke out, not loud, but enough to be real. Janet rose halfway from her seat. "You're turning this into a circus. None of you understand what's at stake." I looked directly at her. "We understand perfectly. Rules end where rights begin." The phrase echoed through the room, clean and sharp enough to carve the air. Even the cameraman stopped adjusting his lens for a moment. I picked up the bylaw binder, her binder, and opened it to the page she'd altered. Section 12-07 was inserted without vote. Time-stamped 03-17 after adjournment. It was used to issue a violation notice against a disabled resident. I held up the printed exhibit. "The board has reviewed this. The evidence is uncontested." Janet's lawyer began to speak, but she cut him off with a raised hand. Her voice cracked on control. "You can't just erase everything I built here." "No," I said. "But we can rebuild it, right?" Frank placed a motion slip on the table. I moved to remove Janet Cole from her position as HOA president and bar her from discretionary spending accounts pending audit. Eleanor seconded. I looked to the crowd. "All in favor, raise your hands." Hands went up one by one at first, then all at once like a tide finding its direction. The cameras caught the moment, a still of democracy rediscovering its spine. "Opposed?" I asked. Only a few stayed down, looking smaller than they had a minute before. The motion passes, I said the words as plain as breath. A sound, half gasp, half release, moved through the room. The gavel came down once more this time, not for silence, but for closure. Janet stood slowly. The lights from the cameras glinted off her earrings as she looked over the faces that used to obey her. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, but every microphone caught it. "You'll tear it all down." I didn't answer. She turned her heels, clicking against the linoleum, each step fainter until the door opened and swallowed her. For a moment, no one moved. Then Eleanor Rose walked to the front and placed her hand on my mother's shoulder. "Dignity restored," she whispered. I looked out at the crowd, the same neighbors who once thought order was worth more than fairness, and saw something rare reflection. The projector behind me still glowed faintly, displaying the final slide from the evidence packet. It wasn't law or testimony. Just 3 words Frank had typed at the bottom: access granted, approved. Outside, the rain had stopped. The camera lights dimmed. And, for the first time since this began, the ramp outside wasn't just a structure, it was a statement that would outlast all of us. The town hall was full long before the meeting began. Folding chairs scraped the tile fans, buzzed against the heat, and a dozen phones filmed the front table where the gavel rested like a small piece of judgment. The microphones hissed, feeding back in short bursts that made everyone flinch. I stood at the center of the long board table. The placard before me read, HOA Special Session Accessibility Hearing. For weeks they'd whispered, argued, posted. Tonight, everything would go on record. In the back row, Eleanor Park gave a slow nod, barely a motion, but it anchored me. Beside her sat my mother, hands folded, the soft gray ramp visible through the window beyond her shoulder. Across the table, Janet Cole adjusted her blazer. She looked smaller under the camera lights, her expression a blend of denial and habit. Frank Dillon sat to her right, eyes lowered to a folder of reconciled accounts. I tapped the microphone. "This session is convened under Article 3 of the Lakeside Estates Charter," I said. "We will address violations regarding accessibility and board conduct. The record will remain public." A hush spread across the room, neighbors who once whispered at barbecues now holding their breath. Janet's attorney cleared his throat. "My client maintains she acted within the scope of her duties." I nodded. "And I maintain that scope ends where rights begin." The words landed. Even the camera operators paused. I opened the first folder. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 1132, and the Fair Housing Act, accessibility is a right, not an aesthetic. I lifted the printed notice: violation 1207, failure to maintain community harmony. This clause was added after adjournment without board vote. "That is misconduct." Janet's eyes flickered. "We discussed uniformity, not discrimination." Frank looked up, voice steady. "The ADA fund payments were made to your nephew, without oversight, and you threatened me when I questioned them." Her jaw tightened. "That's a lie." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The audience stirred. Someone muttered, $12,000, and phones came up again. Eleanor rose from her chair. "For the record, I reviewed the filings. The evidence is sound. The variance denial was unlawful and cruel." Applause started in the back, small but growing. Janet shot Eleanor a look sharp enough to break glass. "You're all turning on me." "This isn't about turning," I said. "It's about correction." The gavel struck once. "Order." I read aloud the motion prepared by Frank. To remove Janet Cole as HOA president for cause and to request a third-party audit of the ADA Improvement Fund. Murmurs rippled. I set the motion down and looked over the crowd. All in favor. Hands rose slowly at first, then together like the town taking its first real breath in months. The sound of rustling sleeves filled the silence. Opposed, only 3 remained down. One of them, Janet's own attorney. "The motion passes," I said. The gavel's echo carried through the hall, steady as a heartbeat. Janet stood. Her voice was soft but trembling. "You think this makes you heroes? You'll tear it all down." I met her eyes. "If that's what it takes to build something honest." She gathered her papers, straightened her shoulders, and walked out through the camera lights. The door closed behind her like punctuation. For a moment, nobody spoke. The crowd looked at me, then at one another as if they'd just remembered what fairness felt like. Eleanor came forward and placed a hand on my mother's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought it back to law." I nodded, exhaling the months of tension that had kept my voice measured and my hands still. Behind me, the projector displayed one last image from the evidence packet, a scanned signature bold, and final access granted approved. The meeting adjourned to quiet applause, the kind born not from victory, but relief. Outside, the air was cool, the rain gone. As I stepped down from the table, Eleanor caught my sleeve. "You kept your promise," she said. "No," I answered. "The law did." And as the cameras dimmed, I glanced through the window. The ramp glowed faintly under the porch light, simple, unpainted, unapologetic. Proof that dignity once restored doesn't need to announce itself. It just stands there, solid, lawful, and finally seen. Morning drizzle softened the street, the kind that made everything look newly washed. On the porch, the ramp gleamed under a coat of ADA blue edges, sharp paint still drying. It didn't stand out anymore. It belonged as if it had been waiting for this color all along. 2 neighborhood kids rode past on their bikes, splashing through puddles. "Nice ramp," Mrs. Hayes once shouted. My mother looked up from her mug of tea and waved a shy smile, tugging at her face. That simple wave said more than weeks of meetings ever could. Behind her, the smell of barbecue drifted through the air. The new HOA board had organized a community cookout for change. It was part apology, part truce, and a chance for everyone to look one another in the eye again. Folding tables lined the yard, paper plates stacked beside bowls of coleslaw and cornbread. The voices were softer now, neighbors greeting each other instead of judging. Eleanor Park appeared with a foil pen and that easy smile that always arrived before advice. "Hard to believe this place nearly came apart," she said, setting the food down. "Sometimes things need to break before they can hold weight," I said. She laughed. "You sound like a judge." I looked out at the ramp, its blue surface glistening with rain. Maybe just a neighbor who learned how to file paperwork. Frank Dillon called from the grill. Apron, stained grin genuine. "Variances signed and logged," he shouted. "We're officially legal and paid up." He held up the document with the HOA seal, the one that had taken months to earn. Access, ramp. Variance approved. I walked over and took it carefully, reading the ink, the signature lines, the stamp dated this morning. Prop number 3, the final proof that integrity had caught up with power. "Keep a copy for the records," I told him. "Already framed," Frank said, flipping a burger. Right next to the bylaws, Janet pretended to write. We both laughed, the kind that releases pressure instead of building it. The microphone crackled from the porch. Denise Walsh, the new HOA chair, stood before the small crowd. "Before we eat, we'd like to acknowledge what happened," she began, voice steady. "This community made mistakes. We lost sight of what rules are supposed to protect people." She looked toward my mother. "On behalf of the board, we apologize to the Hayes family. Effective today, all variance requests will be reviewed under ADA standards. Transparency reports are posted online." Applause spread across the lawn, not loud, not triumphant, just honest. Janet wasn't here. Her resignation had been accepted. Her name moved to a closed file. The old gavel now sat boxed in the HOA office, replaced by one that didn't sound like control when it struck. Eleanor leaned close and whispered, "You changed more than a bylaw, Michael. I just reminded them what it meant," I said. She smiled. "Rules end where rights begin." The drizzle thinned to mist. My mother reached down, fingertips brushing the fresh paint. "Blue suits it," she said softly. "It's federal standard," I said deadpan, and she laughed, a warm, free sound that filled the porch better than any speech. Eleanor handed me a folder. New bylaw addendum signed this morning. Accessibility and equal compliance. Every member voted yes. I nodded. "Keep a copy," I told her, giving back a duplicate. "You earned it." Frank joined us, carrying a plate stacked high. "You know, he said people are already talking about repainting the clubhouse ramp too." "Contagious," I said. "Accountability usually is," he replied. By late afternoon, the sky cleared enough to show the first stretch of blue beyond the clouds, the same shade as the ramp below. The crowd thinned, neighbors lingering in small groups that sounded like forgiveness. Eleanor packed up her dish. "You could have shouted," she said. "Could have made a spectacle." I shook my head. "Didn't need to. Justice doesn't shout, it waits." She smiled. "And when it arrives, it looks a lot like this." The camera crew that had followed the case for local news filmed one last shot, the ramp's reflection glimmering against the wet pavement, the paint glowing like a quiet flag. My mother sat behind it, smiling, sunlight catching her silver hair. I stood beside her, feeling the air shift lighter, now grounded. The story was over, but the change would stay. As the cameraman packed up, I said it softly, not for broadcast, but for truth. Finally, someone fought back. The rain returned gentle this time, each drop striking the ramp like applause that didn't need a crowd.